Rebel Moon actress Sofia Boutella is making the rounds as the second part of Rebel Moon is expected to release on Netflix in about a month. And she is complaining that there are not enough roles for women in Hollywood. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. This is over at thatparkplace.com. She spoke with Vulture about her role as Cora in Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon films. And she was asked, when you talk about Cora, you do make it seem like she had uniquely deep emotions that you were excited to play. Did the role feel unique because you're used to reading action scripts that don't have that level of depth for female characters? So obviously, kind of being baited into this discussion, but she fully embraces it. She responds saying, I see too often in action films, whether characters are played by a man or woman, that what's appealing to an audience is that you just want to get rid of what's going on internally so you can get to the action. They love seeing an explosion and something flying and something zipping and a laser, and we rush too quickly past what is leading us to this place. But for women, even more. I 100% disagree with that. I think the most iconic action films of all time, you can talk about Gladiator, you can talk about Con Air, you can talk about Die Hard, you can talk about Terminator, you can talk about films like Braveheart, The Patriot. They all have emotional connections with those characters. You are interested in the character that story is following. For Con Air, you want to see him get back to his wife and his daughter that he has never even seen before. Obviously, you have all of the action things that take place in between it, but there's a reason why that scene where he's like, put the bunny down, is so iconic, because he's showing his love for his daughter in that moment, as well as this guy, as well as protecting himself from being outed by the criminal. The reason why we love Die Hard so much is because he's trying to save his wife from these criminals that are trying to rob the Nakatomi Plaza building. I mean, Braveheart, obviously the emotional connection that he has for his wife that was taken from him and murdered. And then he leads a rebellion, and then obviously you get the romance angle too with the French princess. I mean, The Patriot, it's about him fighting to protect his family, because I mean, that's what makes those stories so compelling. It's these emotional. Gladiator, it's about almost like his vengeance for his family being murdered, and then he finally, obviously, he ends up finding peace at the end, in death. But those are emotional storylines. Yes, there's lots of action in those films, and I think we can classify those as action films. Obviously, Braveheart, Patriot, Gladiator, you can also describe them as historical dramas, but there's plenty of action in those films as well. But what's interesting about those films is the characters and the story that they go through, rather than the action sequences. So I think she's completely wrong there. Nevertheless, she goes on and then claims that there are not enough roles for women. She says there are not enough roles for women, roles period, and interesting roles. People are leading the fight, and they're leading with their choices, so that things do change. But a lot of the time, and still too often, considering where we are, women are the vase to carry the flowers for a man. So I don't really understand that metaphor, because I guess you have like, there's one vase, and then you have like all the different flowers in the vase, and that's what she's talking about. So you have like one man, you have one woman to what, like 5 or 6 different men in a movie, which is, I think, what is in like Rebel Moon, ironically. But I don't know. Do you think I don't think there's not enough roles for women. It seems like there's plenty of roles for both women and men. And I think there's lots of interesting roles as well. There might be different roles for women compared to men. Obviously, men are going to probably be more favored in an action film, because that is what men do. They're the ones who are usually taking action. That's not to say that there aren't women who have taken action in the past, but women are usually more suited for different roles than what men are. We were made differently, so I can see that. But we have like plenty of examples of female action heroes. Obviously, Kate Beckinsale in Underworld comes to mind. You got Angelina Jolie is in Salt. I think Charlize Theron is in like Aeon Flux. And then there was some other kind of like vampire type movie that she was in. It was like a vampire sci-fi film. The name escapes me right now. But there's plenty of them. Obviously, you can look at Aliens. Then you can look at the first. You can look at Terminator 2 with Sarah Connor, etc. So I don't know, but then you also have to look at how many women are in kind of these period piece dramas that PBS does. There's tons of roles for women in there, and I think I always feel like there's more female roles than there are male roles. Or obviously, the female characters are the ones getting more of the screen time. You can look at all the adaptations of like Pride and Prejudice and all of those things. Those are definitely more female centered, female heavy rather than male. So obviously there's different genres, and certain genres are going to have more female actors than male actors, and certain other genres are going to have more male actors than female actors. But nevertheless, she goes on and says this: if this was a few years ago for Rebel Moon, they would have looked for a male lead action character. Charlize Theron's character on Netflix, The Old Guard, a project like that would have not happened if it wasn't for people pointing out the imbalance and being loud about it. I actually probably agree with her. I think a lot of the reason why a lot of those films have been made is because of the woke activism and feminist push within Hollywood and the major institutions of it. We see that in programs like Reimagine Tomorrow at the Walt Disney Company, where they literally have quotas. You see that at Amazon Studios. They have their own quotas as well, and their inclusion standards and all that stuff. All of these studios have this stuff. So she's actually probably exact right about that. But that's not to say they didn't make films with female leads in action films before that. Obviously, I just talked about Terminator 2. I talked about Underworld. I talked about Salt, etc. Those were all kind of before a lot of these inclusion standards and the clear injection of feminism was happening, or clear capture of these institutions by feminism. She then went on and said, I'm sure if my great grandmother were still alive, she would look at what we're doing now and she'd be baffled and impressed and probably very proud. But to some of us, it's moving too slow. For us, we're still in the middle of it and we want it now. Sometimes I see the industry as saying, okay, we're going to prove that change is being made. So we're going to do all these projects. And sometimes I look at them and the attention to detail wasn't there as if it was a man. Well, that's because it's a lot of times it is a virtue signal as well. Obviously, I do think feminism has captured it, but at the beginning, especially during the Me Too movement, a lot of that was, I think, a virtue signal. But you also then had the power moves being made by a lot of these female executives. One can look at Kathleen Kennedy and how she was clearly creating a studio there at Lucasfilm to push feminist messaging. She admits that in a Fortune magazine panel discussion back in 2015, before The Force Awakens even comes out, and how she was injecting feminism onto the screen and was pushing it behind the scenes as well. Then we had Boutella went on and said this: it's a man's world. Look at how a man is filmed. For men, the camera punches in. For men, the camera lingers. The editing doesn't cut away, and it pulls in tight in the eyes. For women, the cut is quick. I see it's punching in, but then quickly it cuts before you actually get to where we're supposed to be. You could have come in here, points at her eyes and her face. That's something, honestly, I haven't heard people talk about. Yes, we want more characters for women that are strong in how they're written, but then what you do with the camera and how you edit is also going to indicate something. I feel like the women are being done a disservice in the editing room. I'm like, this man wasn't filmed that way. You stayed, you punched in, you went and looked at the emotion because you wanted me to really get it. She reiterated this point later on in the interview, saying, I've seen it for me like, oh, maybe a close up there would have been nice, or punching in on the eyes here, or lingering here longer. But I see it more when I see other films like look, the camera stays and stays and stays. But for women, we just cut on something really interesting that you deprived me of experiencing fully. And it's frustrating. There's way more love and attention that has been given to male characters than women. And that's not just on the page, it's in the edit. So I can't really comment on that. I don't like track how often the camera zooms in on a male or woman face in movies. And I don't really pay attention to that. That's not something that really like sticks out in my mind. So I don't even know if this criticism is valid or not. Who knows? But that is something that she is now levying at directors and cinematographers and cameramen, that they need to stay on her face a little bit longer when she's performing action sequences, so you can get the emotion of what she's doing. So it's, I guess, comparable to the way it's being done with her male co-stars. And then finally, she's asked this: if she believes this is a problem with action movies or a wider problem. And she says, I think it's more in action, but it's an industry-wide problem. And again, I think this is a genre thing, right? This is what I was talking about earlier. Clearly, action films are going to have a different audience. Different people are attracted to them. Different people are making those movies. And they have different ideas of how they make them compared to maybe a period piece like Pride and Prejudice or something like that. I feel like there are female directors, female actresses that have a say, and they're able to stir it in the opposite direction and make a change, but it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come naturally because, like we just talked about, men and women are different. That's why it doesn't come naturally. They're attracted to different things. So you'll have men being more centered in action films, and you'll have women being more centered in the kind of these like historical drama and period pieces, like Pride and Prejudice. So uh, that's why it doesn't come naturally because they're different. But that is what Sofia Boutella had to say. Let me know what you guys make of what she had to say here. What do you make of her saying that there are not enough roles for women in Hollywood? I know we didn't even talk about kind of how the industry has shrunk and there's not even going to be less roles because of the writer's strike, the actor strike, all of that stuff. So that obviously plays into it as well. But let me know what you guys make of what she had to say here in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, but to always speak the truth.